Regardless of the style of garden you have, I'm sure you're going to want to have a tree in it. But if you've got a small garden, you're going to need to have something that doesn't get particularly big and doesn't have a really aggressive root system. Now, one of the favorites, of course, up here on the Highveld, if you're creating a bushveld garden, is to have the fever tree. Acacias are always wonderful. They're indigenous and they really add that flavor to your garden. But we can't call them acacia anymore, because the Australians went and stole it. What can we say? So if you're looking at a tree which has got a straight thorn like this, it's now going to be Vachelia. So this is Vachelia xanthophylla. And if it has a hook thorn, like the monkey thorn tree, well, that is called Senegalia. Let's just get that one straight. Now, the reason why we're saying don't be tempted to go and put a fever tree into your garden if it's a small garden is because they have particularly aggressive root systems. And it's going to really play havoc with any of your foundations that you've got for outside walls or for your house itself. By the way, the fever tree gets up to 14 meters tall and 10 meters wide. When I say big, that's big. One of the lovely indigenous trees we see popping up in small gardens and sidewalks all over the place, of course, is the river bush willow, or the Combretum erythrophyllum. Now, as the name would suggest, of course, it grows by rivers most of the time. So unless you have one of those flowing through the bottom of your garden, I would suggest you don't put one into your garden, especially if it's really, really small. Reason being is that this thing gets up to at least 10 meters in height in the wild and probably will do so in your garden as well. So a medium-sized garden, absolutely great. If you're determined to have one of these, make sure that it's at least 3 meters away from any boundary walls or from your foundations, otherwise it's going to cause absolute havoc. One of the lovely things about this tree, of course, is that these lovely big leaves actually change color when it comes to autumn, getting those wonderful autumn colors that everybody loves so much. So that is a big pulling point, but once again, I would say a no-no for a small garden. Another group of trees which have become very popular in people's gardens these days, I'm not sure if it's because they use them as Christmas trees and are now planting them out. Of course, the yellowwoods, the podocarpus, this one is falcatus, which we saw in the garden earlier on in the show. Now, you can use them in a small garden, and these are very slow growing, and they're fantastic when they're only as tall as me. But I've seen these at 25 meters tall in a friend's garden, and there's no garden underneath it. They may grow very, very slowly, but they are going to grow very, very big. So rethink your ideas of putting a yellowwood in your garden, unless you have a lot of space. A better bet for a small garden, of course, might be the latifolius if you really want to have a yellowwood. You can see the difference in the leaves here. This is the falcatus, and this one is a little bit wider. And this tree only gets to about 4 meters tall, as opposed to the henkelii, which is the one with the drooping leaves, or the falcatus, which will get at least 10, 12, 20 meters tall. So you want something indigenous and beautiful in your garden? This is your baby. The one family of trees I'm particularly drawn to, I have to be quite honest, are the Carees. They were known as Rus, they're now Cersei, and there's a number of varieties which are pretty good for small gardens. And I have a really small garden and I put the Pendulina in, and that is the white Caree. You also get the Lancia and this one here, the Lucidi. They get to about between 4 and 6 meters tall, depending on the variety. And the Pendulina especially, I've seen them in parking lots where they droop down and they're really pendant, and that's why they got that name. Really nice little shade tree. Birds absolutely love them. They get great fruits in them as well. And quite frankly, if you're going to have one indigenous tree in your garden, the Caree is the way to go. One great and beautiful addition to any indigenous garden, of course, would be this one with its beautifully little round leaves, very, very kind of lacy feeling to it, very light and airy. These incredibly beautiful pink flowers, which is something you don't usually see in this kind of environment. But this isn't actually a small tree, although you could call it that. It's actually a large shrub. It's the Indigo ferro, and that is the river Indigo. This will get to about 4 meters tall, and you may need to just keep it in shape a little bit to make sure it looks like a tree, rather than just something that's gone completely mad and weeping all over the place. But frankly, if you want to create something beautiful in your garden, nothing better than this one. One of the perennial favorites, especially in the parks places in Johannesburg and like that, and quite frankly, who can blame them for wanting this, of course, is the silver birch, the Betula pendula. And this is absolutely beautiful. If you look at the shape of the leaves, the way that it hangs, it's a really fantastic addition to any garden, especially when the bark on the trunk goes that beautiful silvery white. Now, there are people who say, well, rather plant in an indigenous variety, and that, of course, would be your Heteropyxis or the Natal lavender tree, which will do exactly the same thing when it comes to the bark. But I have seen lavender trees getting up to about 15 meters tall. But the thing is, to keep the trees contained, make sure that they don't have that much room to spread out. And like most things, if you keep them dwarfed, well, they will not grow as big as they should in the wild. Well, that's the theory in any case. Well, the one problem, of course, with the silver birch, and the reason why you should probably go indigenous, is that they're not really suited to our high veld conditions, or in fact any conditions in South Africa. They're used to the colder weather that you'd find over on the European continent. So they tend to die off. I've had 2 die off in my gardens. I do like having all those white stems in my space, which is why I've got a variety, including the leopard tree and this. So if you can, if you have enough space, rather go for the Heteropyxis than the Betula. But I tell you what, they're still going to be always one of my favorites.